just jump right in, right? If you want to, I'll start talking a little bit on the libraries as we go, right? And I'll start explaining on why we go and we use them, right? I'm pretty sure all of you have R installed already. Yeah. Okay, so first I'm just going to go in and I'm going to create a data frame. And as we go along, I'll start explaining if that's okay with you guys. Yeah. Okay, so first I'll just go in and I'll set a seed to 1. I'll start creating a data frame, which I'll call stocks. For now, the name doesn't really matter. But so from here, I'll just go in and I'll call something here called a time, and I'll say as date. Then I'll say 2019. Say 101. Then right now, all we're doing is we're just creating the data frame that we're going to be playing around with, right? And then we're going to create a value X. And this, I'm going to have, I'm just going to generate some random values. And I'm going to say 10, 20, 1. And then if I'm going too fast, also let me know. Okay. And I'm going to copy this 2 more times. And then I'm just going to create Y, and I'm going to create Z. And let's see. I do this. Okay, so we're setting a random. We're setting a seed here to number 1, and then we're creating a data frame called stocks. We're putting in a value in called the time. We'll say the first day it's the January the 1st of 2019, and then we're creating the X, Y, and Z values. If you want to, we can also change these a little. So then all we're doing is that we're going to have 10 values for X, for Y, and Z. We're saying the mean for all 3 is going to be of 20, but then we're changing the standard deviation on all the 3 values. Okay, and then after I do all of this, I just hit Control Return on my end, right? And and we should be able to see something similar to this down here. Did everybody get this? Yeah. Okay. So yes. So like I mentioned, right? We created the three values of X, Y, Z, right? And then we have our time value over here. All we did was we started with January the 1st, and then we added the 9 other values in here, and then R did everything for us. All these numbers, we got them at random right now. But all we're trying to do is we're trying to replicate a problem that we get to see a lot when we're trying to deal with data. Okay, so what a lot of people would say is that this data is in a white format. Okay, so then let's say, has anybody ever come upon this problem before? Yes. So you want to go ahead, right, and you want to graph it, right? So what happens? Let's say if you want to graph it and you're looking at it, you're probably going to grab time and you're going to use X. Then you're going to grab time and you're going to use Y. You're going to grab time and you're going to use Z, right? So it kind of looks like it's going to take a little bit of time here, right? So yeah, so then that's why we would go in and we would use libraries like TidyR. Well, I say TidyR. Some people say tidier, so it doesn't really matter. But like it's we would then proceed and we'll start using the library, and then once we use it, I'll explain what it does. Okay. So then we come over here to our code, and then if we don't have it, we're just going to go install packages, and we're going to import TidyR. Okay. And then with this, it would install it on our machine. I'll cancel it because I already have it on mine. And then just to use it right, I would just say library. And I would just import it. And there, I have it. I'm just going to comment this in. And let me know when you have the library there. Everybody has it? Yeah, okay. So then now we go over here and we're going to start using our library, right? So you remember our problem that we had that our data was too wide, right? Okay, so the two main functions from TidyR are gather, and the other one is going to be spread. So we're gonna use gather first, right? All we're gonna do is that we're gonna obviously like what it means that we're just gonna put together our data, right? So then we're gonna go here and we're gonna say stocks L, for example. We're just giving them any number, any name there, right? We're gonna say gather. And if you see here, we're already using the TidyR library, right? Okay. And then I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to say, here as I start typing, right, you can see that RStudio is kind of helping me with the kind of values the function is calling for, right? So we're just going to go say data, right? So what do we use as data? We're going to use our stocks data, right? And we're going to have a key and we're going to have a value, which we're going to use right now, right? So coming from this comment over here, okay, I'm just going to say data equals, and I'm going to say stocks, and I'm going to put a comma. I'm going to say key equals, if you remember from our, okay, if you remember from our data from stocks, right, we only had the time, the X, and the Y, and the Z features or values, right? So now we're going to be creating a new value called stocks, okay? So what we want to do is that we want to graph this data. So instead of just going and doing 3 different graphs, right, and then putting them all together, right, I'm going to grab all these 3, and I'm going to put them under one value, and I'm going to call it stocks. You can call it whatever you want. Okay. So then my key is going to be stocks here. Okay. And then or stock. Okay. And then I'm going to say value. And then I'm going to say price. And it's going to be X, Y, Z. Okay. And then okay. And let me know when you come about and get this. Okay, so then like I was explaining before, right? Okay, I gathered my data with using the TidyR library, right? Instead of having 4 different features, right? Now I only have 3. Okay, I grabbed everything under X, Y, Z. I just mushed it in together, and then obviously I kept the same name for every stock. And then here, when I was putting them together as gather, right? I said I was going to have price and I was going to have stock. Okay, so this is where the names are coming from. Okay, so then if I want to go and probably I kind of spoiled the fun over there, right? But now if I want to go and I want to graph everything, it's going to be a little bit easier, right? Because I'm just going to say graph time and graph price. Okay, so then I proceed over here and I'm just going to say, for example, let's see, I'm going to load ggplot here, and I'm just going to say ggplot. I'm going to use stock L. Yes. And then I'm just going to say X equals equals price. And okay, and then I'm just going to say geom line. Okay. And then I run this, and I get this nice graph here on the right. So yes, as I was explaining before, right? Instead of going like this one with this one, this one with that one, this one with that one, and then probably trying to do like 3 different graphs or whatnot, right? I had to go change the shape of my data in order for me to go ahead and obtain that over there, right? So I don't know if it made sense why we did that. Yes? Yeah.
Scroll down.
Oh, sure. On the code?
For the GG plot line.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Okay. Yes. Okay, yeah, so all I did here was I loaded my TidyR library, right? I gathered, I said my data is going to be stocks. I'm going to use the key called the stock. I wanted to call it stock. I could change it to whatever it is that I want. And then I'm going to say my values, they're all going to go under the price name. And I'm just going to grab, based on the data that I have, I'm going to grab the features called XYZ. So then that's why when I get my data back, I have the time, I have stock, and I have price over there. And then after that, I just proceed to a graph my gathered data, and I see that it's a little bit easier to manage. But this is because of what I want to do, right? I mean, it would all depend in a lot of things why you would gather it, right? But this would be one way to do it. Let me know when you guys are ready. And yeah. So then there's a couple of things that are a little bit I would say that are very important with this, right? So TidyR, it falls under the umbrella of what would be a Tidyverse. The Tidyverse, a group of libraries, right? So let's say for you to be able to use this type of library, you fall under what would be the Tidy data. So there's this person, his name is Hadley Wickham. He's the one that wrote all these libraries. So he says that in order for you to have a tidy data, he says that each variable has to form a column, right? And then each row has to be an instance of that, an instance of what happened, right? So like they're not going to repeat themselves in a way, right? And then it's going to make it easier for it makes variables easy to access as vectors, and then easy to type observational unit forms of a table. So like it makes it easier to work with data, but like it has to be that way, right? Like every variable's a column, and then each observation forms a row. Do you want me to keep going? Yeah. Okay. So then we went from wide to narrow, right? But then we could also come into the point where we have a very narrow data, but then we want to make it wide. So then how do we do that, right? Okay, so then we come about a TidyR again. Okay, so then now we use the stock L. So I'm just going to call it as stock. We can really change the name on that if you want. And then if you remember, we use gather to make it a narrow. And now we're going to use spread to make it wide, because we're going to spread our data, right? That's what it means. So then we're going to use here spread, like you see here. It's saying that's coming from the TidyR library, right? And then I'm just going to say data equals, and then I'm going to grab my narrow data, which is stock L, okay? And then I'm going to say my key is stock, which is something that I declared up above on for that data when I gathered it. And then I'm going to say my value equals anybody remember? Price. Okay. So then yes. And then this is what I end up. So here it is, right? Like when I made it narrow, right, I said I'm going to create stock and I'm going to create price, right? So when I want to spread it again, right, I'm just saying my key is going to be stock, and then my value is going to be price. So then I just run this, and then I go and I see what I just created. And if you see down here, we just made our data wide again. Obviously, at stock is the same thing as stock, but then this would be an example of why we would gather data or we would spread it out, right? Sometimes you never know, you have surprises, and all of a sudden you go and see, oh my God, what am I going to do with this data, right? A lot of people go and they throw it in the spreadsheet, and then they start copying, pasting data around. But this would be one quick way of doing it, right? And yes, we did a little bit of a writing, and because we had to say data equals this, key equals that, value equals that. I mean, once you get the hang of it, you can write a little bit easier. For example, let me show you here. Let's say I'm going to call my data here. I'm going to call it ABC. Well, yeah, you can call it whatever. But then I go and I say spread. And then I know that I'm spreading my stock L data. I know that my key equals stock, and I know that my value equals price. Okay? And then if I go and I print ABC, I get exactly the same thing, right? So obviously, this one and this one are exactly the same. The only thing is that when you're starting, sometimes it's easier just to come and say what your data, what your key is, what your value is. But once you know what it is that you're doing, right, obviously you just want to do it like very quick, right? But if somebody comes in and they don't know why you use that library, they're going to have to go into the documentation and see what everything means and whatnot, right? So, I mean, sometimes it's best practice to use this way, but you can also use the short version, right? Okay, so yeah, this is gather and spread is pretty much what TidyR is about. Yes, there are other libraries that I'll show you a couple afterwards, right? But then, let's say, going back to our original data, which is this one over here. Okay, let's say you've never heard of TidyR, okay? And you need to do exactly the same thing that we just did, right? And let's say somebody comes up to you and tells you, well, you can use the Reshape library, right? So then what do you do there? Okay, so then we're going to do something very similar, and I'll show you. Okay, so then we're going to go and we're going to install packages, and we're going to call a Reshape, and this one's called Reshape2. Okay, and then after you install it, you just go and you call exactly the same thing, which is a okay. And then let me know when you have that. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm gonna proceed, and I'm just gonna call it something totally new, right? And I'm gonna use the Reshape. So what does Reshape do? Remember, TidyR gathered, right? Reshape melts. Okay. So yeah, it's you kind of know where it is that I'm going, right? We're gonna like put together our data, right? So then we're just gonna go. I'm gonna melt, and you can see there I'm calling the Reshape library, right? We're gonna call our data, and then we're gonna start generating everything in there, right? So let's see. Our data, it's called stocks. Okay. Then we're gonna have something called measure vars, the measurable variables, and here what I want to put in here, going back to the to our data, right? Our variables that we want to melt into one variable are going to be x, y, z. Okay. So then here I create a vector which has x, has y, and it has z. Okay. And then here I'm going to say my variable name equals stock. Then I'm going to say my value name equals price. Okay. And then I just hit I run this, and I go and I see what I just did right now. You want me to make the code bigger? No? Oh, okay. Okay. So then I run our stocks, and I go and I look, and like we saw this example before when we did the gather, right? The only thing here is that we had to write a little bit more for melt, right? Yes, obviously I had to say which were the variables that we're gonna put there, and I had to say what the variable name was gonna be. I had to go say what the value of the value name was gonna be here as well. And here I totally have to separate everything, right? But yes, I do have to write a little bit more. But then at the end of the day, I get the same result, right? Okay, so now I go in, and yes, I could plot it again. And then obviously, since we're using the same data as when we're using TidyR package, we're going to get exactly the same graph, right? So then, okay, we melted with using a reshape, okay? So what happens? What if we're not going to work on this data again, and then we need to bring it back, okay? So then what do you use here, okay? So, okay, so here now we're going to use, I'm just going to create a new variable. Oh, what happened? Let's see. Oh, there, we're back. Sorry. Then we're going to say, let's see, we're going to use something called dcast. So I'm going to call dcast stocks, okay? And then I'm going to say dcast. And there you can see that I'm calling Reshape2 library, right? And then I have a brief summary like of everything that the function calls in, right? So then I'm going to obviously call in my data. I'm going to say I can use functions or whatnot, right? But then in order for us to, like the equivalent of this would be the following. So let's see. So here I would say, to be fair, I'm going to use exactly the same variable, the same data frame that I created using the reshape library, right? I'm just going to say R stocks. What's that one, right? I'm going to say time, and I'm going to say stock. If you remember from the values that I could put in my function, I could use a formula. So now here I'm using a formula, right? And then I'm saying my value var equals price, which is the where I put in all the values in my all the prices for my stocks, and then I go about, and then I just go and see what I just created. So I'm just gonna say ECAS stocks, and then I end up with exactly the same thing. Make sense? So yeah, I would say it's a little bit about preference, right? Yes, I can do the same thing with the two different libraries, right? But the two different libraries use different things, right? Some people might like Reshape. Some people might like TidyR, right? So me, for example, I tend to like a little bit more TidyR because since I use a lot more the libraries that come under Tidyverse, like let's say I use a lot dplyr, for example, right? So with dplyr, I can I can mutate my data, I can do like a lot of things, right? So then in that way, or in that sense, I would say I prefer TidyR, right? But it's just a matter of preferences, like I said, right? And as you saw, right, we did starting with the one data set, we did exactly the same thing with both libraries, right? So everybody follow? Yeah. Okay. So yes, each library will have its own different other functions that work along with data, right? Like let's say Reshape has something like a data set called the Smiths. It has another one like which is about French fries. I've never used them, but I found it quite interesting that if we ever need data on French fries, we can get it from Reshape, right? And then for example, I found a couple in, like let's say with the TidyR, I saw a couple of functions that was more like to unite data, to separate data. I don't know if you want to go over those or. But yeah, but like in the sense of the libraries, right? Mostly what they do is that they put together data, but they separate it, right? Based on what it is that you need or that you want to do, right? Yeah. Do you want to go over the other libraries? I can give you like a brief example. Okay. Okay, sure. Okay, so let's see. We're going to change our data set a little bit, which is this one that we started with at the beginning, right? Okay, so let's go and you'll see why it's going to make sense what we're going to do right now. Okay, so we're going to create a group, and we're going to say 1, 2, 3. So we're going to 3 possible possibilities that we can have within our group. Okay, and then we can go from there, and I can say stocks. Remember, we're changing back our original data set, right? And I'm going to say stocks group. It's going to be equal to, and I'm just going to say sample of I'm going to say a sample of group. And replace equals. Okay, and then I just go about and I print stocks again. And then all I did here was I added a new value to my data set, and I just started sending out all these times into different groups. It could have been like, let's say, several people from, I don't know, from my company bought stocks on this day or something like that, right? And that's why we end up with the different groups, right? We just did a random sample there. Okay, and then let's add another value, right? And like, let's see. We're going to create colors. And then same thing that we did as groups, right? And we're going to create another vector here. And then we're going to say blue, red, green. And I'm just going to save this here, right? And then I'm going to say stocks color. And then I'm going to do another sample. I'm going to use my colors group here that I created before. I'm going to use exactly the same code that I copied over here. And then I run this and I print stocks again. Okay. And then all I'm doing is I'm adding new random values into my data frame that I started with. And then now we're going to get into a little bit more fun, because we're going to start. I'm going to start explaining why we're going to use certain functions within the TidyR library. Okay. So like, let's say, okay, group and color is good, but that doesn't really help us that much. Like, let's say we want to put them together, right? Okay, so then for that, I would probably use, we can use the TidyR example, right? So then, okay, let's call it a T stocks, for example, okay? And I'm gonna unite. If you see here, I'm calling the unite library function from the TidyR library. Okay, so then here I'm going to say what my data is. I'm going to say which columns, and I can say what kind of separator I want. Remember, I'm just putting together 2 columns here, right? So to unite my data, right, I'm just going to say use the stocks data set. And then use category. Okay, so this would come in as our final output, right? So what did I say here, right? Okay, so I grabbed my stocks data frame, right? I said that I wanted it to be called a cat, like for a category or something like that. And then I'm gonna group a color. I'm gonna group the group column, and I want it to be separated by the minus there. I could have used underscore, I could have used anything I wanted, right? So then as you can see down here on my new data frame, right, I did absolutely exactly what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to unite, bring those two together, right? So then the same way that we had gone over the previous examples, right? If we put them together, we could come up with some data, and then all of a sudden we go like, well, we could take it apart as well, right? So then how do we do that? Okay, so then I'm gonna go, if I unite it, then I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna separate, okay? And then I'm just gonna call it R stocks, and I'm gonna separate, okay? And there I can use rejects if I want, and I can use a couple of other things that the function is calling for. And then, okay, so what am I separating, okay? So up here, you can see that I created T stocks, or whatever your data frame is called. But in this case, since we're separating that column over there, I'm gonna call it T stocks, okay? Then I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna proceed to separate the CAT category. Well, I was kind of lazy and I didn't want to write category, right? But yeah, so that's why I call it CAT, right? So I'm gonna separate the cat category, and then I want the separation to be called group, and the other column I want it to be called color. Okay, and then what am I looking for? Okay, so here I'm just saying separate the column by the minus sign, right? I could have like an ampersand, I could have a dot, right? Like let's say if we had a positional, some sort of positional a address or something, and we wanted to separate it by latitude and longitude, for example, and we want to separate by a dot, then we say the character that we want to separate, we just do put a dot there, right? And then I run this, and let's see what we get. Okay. Then if you see down here, I called after, okay, let's see. Okay, I initially started like this, right? I went ahead and I united those two columns, and I wanted to call it cat. I said I want to call cat, I could call it category, right? Then if I had this, for example, I can separate it, right? I separate it. And then here I'm just saying, grab the cat column, okay? And separate it in these two new column headers, right? This is what I want my new columns to be called. And I want you to separate them by the minus sign there. And yeah, I can change it to whatever it is that I want, right? Like, let's say if I had the telephone numbers or something like that, and I wanted to get like the, let's see, I want to see if it's a 416 or a 647 or whatnot, right? I can just take that part out, right? And yeah, like there's like pretty much what you can do with these libraries, right? It helps you a lot to work with your data, right? Like you don't need to take it into a spreadsheet and start doing copying and pasting or anything like that, right? It's just like get comfortable with it, right? And it doesn't really matter which library you use, because you'll see that a lot of libraries have very similar functions, right? It's just use which one you prefer the most or which one you like, right? So, yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or thoughts you want to ask? We have a bit of time left. Otherwise, we can just. Great, thank you again.